So good evening, everyone. My name is Anand Rose, Director of the Respiratory Sleep and Ventilation Unit at Flinders Medical Centre, Southern Adelaide Local Health Network. Today we're broadcasting from Flinders, the Department of Respiratory Sleep and Ventilation, the largest and busiest across the state, with a strong clinical presence and which spans airways, respiratory procedures, laboratories, and a very strong sleep medicine clinical and research program, and includes 2 pulmonary rehabilitation programs as well. As acknowledgement to country, we acknowledge and respect the Aboriginal peoples as the state's first peoples and nations and custodians of the lands, their traditional owners and occupants of the land and waters in South Australia. We acknowledge the spiritual, social, cultural, and economic practices of the Aboriginal people that come from their traditional lands and waters, and that they maintain their cultural heritage beliefs, language, and laws, which are of ongoing importance, that they have made and continue to make a unique and irreplaceable contribution to the state. Today, we have 2 eminent clinical researchers from the department. Going first is Associate Professor Sutapa Mukherjee. Sutapa has extensive research award and is also the clinical lead for clinical research lead in the department. She's also current president of the Australasian Sleep Associations. She's got an extensive track record both in respiratory and sleep research. So without much ado, I'll hand over to Sutapa.
Thank you, Anand, and thank you to Cara and John for inviting me to talk to you today. I'm just going to share my screen and my slides. And then we'll go into slideshow from beginning. Okay, now can you see my slides okay?
Yeah.
Yes, excellent. So my talk today is about how to build collaborative research capacity in a clinical environment, something that's a really big challenge for us in a busy clinical space. So what we wanted to do in our department is to use clinical research as a platform to improve the way we provide care to our patients. And we want to think about the quality of the care that we provide and how we can do impactful research. Within our department, we have some capacity for research. We have our advanced trainees who have to do a significant body of research work now as part of their FRACP training. We have various PhD students that many of us supervise. We have our medical students through Flinders University who are doing MD advanced studies. And then, of course, we have nurses, we have nurse practitioners, we have allied health, who all have some capacity for research. And I think it would be across the board that within a busy clinical service, there are a number of clinically trained people in our organisation who really want to do research. There's a lot of enthusiasm. But there is a need to build research skills. There aren't that many of us that have PhDs. And so there's a need to build that infrastructure for research capacity and productivity within a busy clinical department. Of course, COVID came along a few years ago, really knocked us on our head, particularly in the respiratory department. We had to work differently. We had to do many things differently, but we still managed to have a research meeting once a week where anyone doing any research can come and talk about their research, talk about what they want to do, talk about the barriers that they're coming up against once a week. And that's attended by scientists, it's attended by academics, it's attended by clinically trained people across the breadth of our organisation. So trying to create research infrastructure, which can really facilitate research productivity and lead to high quality clinical research, but also can be self-sustaining, is kind of difficult in a clinical environment where I think it'd be fair to say up until recently, research has really almost been a dirty word in the clinical space. And so how do we engage and empower all members of the department to be clinical research champions and actually participate fully in research? And we also need to provide a collaborative platform for basic scientists and those that are not clinically trained to be able to work with us. So our current department, as Anand has said, it's a very busy clinical department. We have all the usual suspects of airways. We have a couple of laboratories. We have the lung function laboratory that's very busy, spread across Noarlunga, as well as Flinders Medical Centre. We have a sleep laboratory, which is incredibly busy, providing diagnostics and therapy. We are the busiest centre for non-invasive ventilation, and we see a lot of motor neurone disease patients and muscular dystrophy patients. We have lots of lung cancer patients, interstitial lung disease, pulmonary hypertension, and lots of other lung diseases. We've got inpatients, outpatients, our nurses and allied health do home visits, and of course we've got the laboratory testing. So how can we add in research into our day-to-day activities? So one of the priorities that we came up with was trying to standardise the way we collect clinical data, and coming back to what we know is really important from epidemiology, using validated questionnaires, standardised ways of collecting clinical data like lung function testing and sleep studies, which we do routinely. Developing key priority areas. One of the big needs is having accessible clinical data in real time, and that's important, so that, because at the moment we have no idea of the patients that we're seeing. We don't know how many patients are admitted with COPD. We don't know on a month-to-month basis what's changing from one day to the next. This is so important for quality and planning, but also for research. Another part of this is all the back-end infrastructure. We need access to statisticians, epidemiologists, administration, IT. We need servers, and we definitely need clinician buy-in and engagement because we need, that's absolutely essential. We need some funding for research, which, as I said, up until recently, I've had the impression that research in the clinical space was somehow seen as not being appropriate. So we decided to come up with a clinical registry, but it had to be something that was not heavy on the clinicians. It didn't need clinicians to actually have to add in lots of data. So what are the key components of a clinical registry? Well, it's basically a database of clinical data, which has been collected in a standardized way. And in fact, it's what we're already doing. We write clinical case notes, and now we have Sunrise, we have an electronic medical record. We perform lung function testing and sleep studies in a standardized way. We have standardized methodology in terms of reporting. So what were the other things? We're already doing that. So we need governance, very important. We, as the clinicians looking after these patients, have a moral and ethical responsibility to look after clinical patient data. We are the custodians, and we have a responsibility, I think, to look at that data, to understand what we're doing, and to help to facilitate research. We have to have a data access committee, and of course we have ethics committees to really review what kinds of projects people are doing, how is it, and coming back to our strategy, which is how is it going to help to build research capacity within the department. We need data analytics, we need hosting, collection of data, and reporting of data. Lots of big questions, but you've got to start somewhere. So we came up with the Respire patient registries, Respiratory and Sleep Patient Registry. So I wrote an application to the Department of Health and Wellbeing Ethics Committee, and subsequently got site-specific approval through SAHLN for an overarching ethic approval to create a registry of all respiratory and sleep data to cover all SAHLN patients that access our service. And implicit in this are three aspects. Firstly, it's an opt-out consent. So that means anyone touching our service is automatically in the registry unless they tell us that they want to be out of it. So then we have consent to include their data in the registry and to access their clinical data for medical research purposes. We also have consent to link their data across other government databases, including things like the Cancer Registry, PBS, any other databases that we may decide are relevant. And we also have got consent to contact these patients again for future research. Very important for clinical trials and also other investigator-led studies that might occur in the future. So what do I think success will look like for a department? So we got ethics approval for this about a year ago, and of course we were in the middle of COVID. And so we did not implement it across all our clinics. We have subsequently started to implement in a piecemeal fashion, and we have just obtained some administrative support, and I hope that over the next 3 months we will be able to roll this out across inpatient, outpatient and home services across our whole department. But what I'd like to, the key performance indicators that I'm looking for is that within the next 5 years, every physician in our department will publish at least one paper as a first author or a senior author. Every advanced trainee will actually publish a paper during their training where they're first author. Within the next 5 years, one clinician-led grant is funded, and I'm kind of excluding myself and Bob and some of the others who already do that. So this is really focused on those that don't normally write research grants. That there's a culture of research which is embedded within the department across all the staff, and that we have a spirit of clinical and research collaboration across all local health networks and universities. I think the legacy is that by implementing this, we will have a database that will continue well past Bob and myself not being there, and that there'll be others younger than us that will be able to carry on learning from our patients, and hopefully that will lead to big impact in a research sense, but also in a clinical sense. So that's the big challenge. There are a number of risks, and I've kind of outlined some of them. That we need funding, we need bodies on the ground to actually implement, and even just being able to collect the data. I think the benefits are huge if we can actually do this. Can we do this together with others on the call? I think collaboration is absolutely essential. If we can do this here, then this is something that could be rolled out across SA Health. And we do have a responsibility to our patients to be learning from them. And as an epidemiologist, we learn best from them when we can group them together and start to look at the similarities and differences. So I might leave that there, Anand.
Thanks, Sutapa. That was an excellent overview. Personally, I know how much effort you've put into this space to trying to get this up and running. I may just draw you out on the major challenge you've faced in your last 3 years in this role. I think we know how busy the unit is, but with both your clinical research hats on, it can't be, I mean, I couldn't stress as much as to how important this is. As they say, clinical medicine without clinical research and inquiry can become clerical medicine. You just keep doing the same thing again and again. And it should be core business, and we should be doing more of this. Can you give a brief overview? Being in a busy clinical unit, what do you think are the challenges, and what solutions would you see, if any, of overcoming these challenges?
I mean, I think the challenges are that the organisation itself, and I'm now talking about SA Health, has to value research. I think it pays a bit of lip service to that. But I also think that in our clinical roles, part of our time should be to do clinical research. You know, I think every clinician ought to be able to participate in research. I think it's a cultural thing. I mean, there's also been logistical issues. I mean, I think we are at the bare bones in the clinical space. It is, you know, we're all running around madly just trying to see the patients that we need to see. So it's not a great environment for research, but we definitely need dedicated research funding. I think research assistants and other more experienced researchers embedded within the clinical system would go a long way to fixing some of those issues. You know, I don't have the time to sit and spend 4 hours writing a paper. You know, the ethics application I wrote was done on the weekends because that was the only time I have to do research. So if we actually had people that could be on the ground and helping with that, it would all move much faster.
Thanks, Sutapa. There are a couple of questions on the chat. Eugene Roscioli, how could you involve basic researchers to enable idea generation and identification of clinical pain points that a basic researcher well served to ascertain? For example, basic researcher in clinical meetings, clinical members in the lab, and similar. I think is lacking in SA's respiratory research real estate.
Yeah, great point, Eugene. I mean, I think, you know, one of the things that we've done over the past couple of years since I've been in the post of leading clinical research is having the Tuesday morning at 11 a.m. research meeting every week. And we have, you know, we have basic scientists that attend that and PhD students from all around the place. And that's a great way for basic scientists to get embedded and understand the breadth of projects that we have. We have artificial intelligence projects. We have some, you know, very clinically focused projects within the department. And, you know, it's also a way of really making sure that people can learn from one another. You know, it's if you've got a broad pool of 10 or 12 or 15, sometimes we have up to 20 people on the call, and someone's experienced a problem, there's actually somebody in the room or on the Teams, we do it on Teams, who knows how to fix that problem. And so it's really building that culture around how do we make sure that we can handle most things in a clinical environment? And we definitely need those basic scientists. So Eugene, if you'd like to come along, I can send you the link to our next meeting. We'd love to have you.
Thanks, Sutapa. Paul Reynolds, is this using a bespoke IT system? And if so, how was that designed and funded? Sutapa, I'll let you answer.
So it is not a bespoke IT system. It is just, the ethics application is just to start to collect that information. So it's, you know, we can get into some of our IT systems at the back end. And I know Anand's got a few links of people that can do that for us. But it's really just a way to start that data collection so that, you know, if we don't have a prospective cohort that we can follow through, we have to keep going back to the whole idea of we've got to consent people to doing any study. What we've got now is that everybody's in the study unless they tell us they don't want to be in it. And then if somebody comes up with this great idea, I want to look at how many patients with COVID who had remdesivir ended up in ICU, we can work backwards and look at that very, very easily, either through interrogating Sunrise or some of the other systems, going through even our pharmacy type databases to find those people.
Well, thanks, Sutapa. That was an excellent overview. And from a clinical perspective, I think you made a stellar contribution in the South, and look forward to progressing this. And thanks very much. We'll now move over to the second speaker, Bob Adams, Professor of Respiratory Sleep Medicine, Flinders University, has been in Adelaide and at the Queen list prior. Extensive research track record, both in respiratory and sleep. Isn't that right, Bob? And currently is Medical Director at the Adelaide Institute for Sleep Health. Bob, can I hand over to you?
I will, as Anand says, take you through a Cook's tour of the Adelaide Institute for Sleep Health, which is located at Flinders University, but clearly has a strong connection and link to the SAHLN Respiratory Sleep and Ventilation Service. And to begin by acknowledging Flinders University, at least the campus sits on the Ghana land, but we have quite a large presence across the centre of Australia, with many traditional owners and custodians of that land that we acknowledge. When the repat shut down, AISH had to move, and in Doug Muggerboy's semi-retirement, we needed sort of two people to do his job. And so the team at AISH, led by Danny Eckert and myself, is a multidisciplinary team. We now have more than 60 people, including students involved, and they cross the gamut from clinical professionals, doctors, nurses, and clinical psychologists, to respiratory and sleep physiologists, clinical researchers, people with epidemiology, statistics, and sort of health services expertise, and probably more uniquely and most interestingly, biomedical engineers who have been very involved in a number of things that we've been doing over recent years. We've got external expert committees and also a very active consumer advisory group that both we use to gain better insights into the problems that we try to deal with, but also help with co-designing some of our research studies and approaches. We do all this in the laboratories in the Mark Oliphant building, which is sort of over the road, over South Road from Flinders. It's about 1,000 square metres of space. We've got 6 bedroom sleep labs, a number of which are acoustically treated to try and block out as much noise as possible. And we have facilities to alter the light in order to do some experiments around circadian and other issues. We've got a state-of-the-art driving simulator and some virtual reality space as well. And the kitchen there is used for sort of live-in ongoing studies. So what areas do we deal with? From our website, there's kind of 6 main areas, and I will give you a cook's tour of all of those in short order, without going on a great deal nor in great detail. But of course, if anybody wants to either talk further or indeed come down and visit, we're more than happy to have visitors on the property. Sleep apnea and respiratory physiology. The overall theme of ASH is really to try and develop personalised therapy for sleep medicine. Beginning with sleep apnea predominantly, Danny Eckert certainly internationally led the way in recognising that sleep apnea is not just due to having a narrow, impaired upper airway due to obesity. Certainly that is important, but there are other factors involved, including the quality of the muscle function in the upper airway, the stability of breathing generally, and the sort of degree of arousal threshold from breathing. And what we're trying to do here is create the notion of treatable traits for sleep apnea, using both some more sophisticated ways of determining those specific endotypes and the contribution they're individually making to the sleep apnea, the clinical phenotypes, and using lots of home monitoring, which is non-invasive, to get a better picture of that. We're then using that to try and target treatment to the treatable traits. We know CPAP is very effective when you use it, but that 50% of people with significant sleep apnea don't. And for the other 50%, we kind of take a bit of a trial and error approach to try and get that working. And what we're trying to work on is there are better ways of doing that? And then monitoring at home how that is going more effectively for the sorts of therapies that don't include CPAP, that don't automatically have a device to tell you how they're going. So some of the examples of that is the notion of the mandibular advancement splint. I mean, that's quite a mature treatment, but working out who might be best to benefit from that, other than just looking, is another thing, and we've got mechanisms to try and approaching that. Drug therapy for sleep apnea. There's a variety of drugs that we've been looking at to see how effective they can be at improving sleep efficiency and arousal threshold. And indeed, a paper just out soon by Atkia, photographed there, shows that combining various aspects of this, such as postural devices, such as a whole device, such as drugs, such as oxygen, can in fact manage almost everybody with sleep apnea in this group, including those, as you can see there, who had initially extremely very high AHIs, which are usually thought to not be really responsive to anything other than CPAP. So the idea is to try and bring that clinic to the clinic, and that's what we're kind of working on into the future. Insomnia, shift work and body clock disruption is another sort of major program we're working on. CBTI, cognitive behavioral therapy for insomnia, is the main therapy recommended for insomnia. It's almost inaccessible to everybody because it currently needs to be delivered via a clinical psychologist who is trained in the therapy, and there's about 65 of them in Australia and about 6 in Adelaide. So we've been working with a group called Sleepio, or from the UK, who do it as an online program through Oxford University, that's just been rolled out extensively through the NHS. And we've been both trialling that in Australia and lobbying the federal government to see if we can get that put on or subsidised in Australia. Other techniques you can see there that have been developed include the THIM device, which is intensive sleep retraining. It's basically torture, and we can go into that in a bit more detail if you're interested. The other thing that Leon Lack and the group were instrumental in involving is sort of better portable therapy light glasses to assist with altering circadian rhythms. And you can see Mick Jagger there wearing them. He may not be getting satisfaction, but at least he gets what he needs from his sleep with that as he goes on tour. One of the other things we're trying to improve is the recognition that insomnia is not just a secondary symptom of depression, but managing it separately can improve people's moods, and there's increasing evidence for that. And again, we're trying to promote that as a sort of ongoing therapy in the mental health space. Health services research, we've got a couple of things there. We have an active clinic that at the moment is predominantly focused on insomnia. We are moving more into the shift work space and have sort of active partnerships with various industry groups, including SA Police, to try and promote that. And we are hoping to move perhaps into more greater clinical groups that are vulnerable to having sleep problems that are generally poorly managed, such as cancer or pain, or as I mentioned, shift work. The other thing on the other side of the screen there is trying to improve the ability of primary care to manage sleep apnea and insomnia, both by increasing training and by providing sort of devices and money. And that's a partnership grant that we have running with various partners, including the College of GPs and local health networks, to try and improve that. And that's just commencing now, and we hope to see some results from that. In the innovations and technology area, which is another thing, this is in partnership with the Withings Group, which is a large French company, who have this rather nifty sleep analyzer that you can see there sits underneath the mattress, and it's got pneumatic and sound sensors, and it's quite actually accurate in measuring sleep macro restriction, certainly sleep timing, but it's actually pretty good at measuring the apnea-hypopnea index in sleep with a 90% sensitivity and specificity. What we've learned from that, and there's a paper there out in the Blue Journal earlier this year from one of our bioengineers, that looked at misclassification of sleep apnea if you do a one-night test versus if you monitor over a more extended period of time, like 14 or 21 days. And what we found is basically 40% of the time you'll misclassify sleep apnea if you just do a one-night test, which can presumably lead to significant problems with either over or under treatment, and lead to further problems in clinical disease, and may in fact explain some of the issues we've had with trials of sleep apnea where we get negative results, or indeed clinically where someone who has a one-night sleep study doesn't recognise as experiencing sleep apnea, but has problems like persistent or difficult to treat atrial fibrillation, or indeed hypertension. And in fact, that issue was dealt with in a study of something like 65,000 people with over 1 million nights of sleep recorded, where we looked at the association of variability in your AHI as compared to your AHI measured on one night, and found really that the association with hypertension was related to the variability rather than the AHI that was mentioned, that was recorded on a single night. So it sort of has immediate clinical applications, we think. Novel biomarkers, there's a few of those that we're kind of into. The one I'm just going to put up here is a collaboration with a Neuroflex company, which has a bunch of virtual reality glasses that measure, saccadic and head position. And we're interested in the value of that in concussions, you can see down there, as to how quickly both it and sleep is useful in the recovery from concussion and getting players back to work. And also on the right-hand side, they're using the fancy driving simulator to see whether it can be used as a predictor for people who are going to be at risk of driving poorly after sleep deprivation or with sleep problems, and can you actually in fact use the Neuroflex as a marker to decide whether that's going to be an issue rather than making them drive. Finally, we have a sort of pretty extensive epidemiology and population health program, and you can see that runs through a variety of things. The one at the top there is looking at the value of novel biomarkers that might be useful to get from an EEG to look at mortality. Using big data, the comorbid insomnia and obstructive sleep apneas from NHANES and Sleep Art Health Study, to look at an emerging clinical problem that we think we've been promoting pretty heavily about comorbid insomnia and obstructive sleep apnea that we think is going to have a big effect. And, you know, the shift work issue around trying to determine just how big of a problem that is and trying to shift policy and interest in that area in the future. And that's it. I will sign off from there.
Thanks, Bob. That is excellent. I'll just go to the chat straight away. Eugene writes, great work, Prof. Do you have a basic research aspect, wet labs? And how would you advise an aspiring laboratory respiratory researchers with opportunities in SA? So I'll read both questions at the same go. And Bob, do you want to tackle them?
Do we have a wet lab? We certainly have physiology function, and we certainly collect biomedical specimens. And we have interest in a number of things, including genetic testing, microbiome, and its relationship to circadian rhythms, and obviously, you know, blood tests in terms of biomarkers for sleep problems. AISH hasn't really pushed that into the respiratory field, but there's no reason why we can't. We certainly have, as I've mentioned, respiratory physiologists who are interested in a number of things. I didn't talk about there is our whole program around COPD and sleep that Tom Altry has been working on for his PhD, and others are working in the same field. Aspiring laboratory respiratory researchers opportunity in SA, well, I'm more than happy to talk to more people about that at any time. As I say, we have a lot of people from various disciplines.
Thanks, Bob. Sutapa, would you like to add to that? Aspiring laboratory respiratory researchers?
I mean, I think what I would say is SA Health have got quite a few people in the Flinders precinct that are looking at biomarkers. I think, Anand, you work with some folks looking in the lung cancer space and gastro. So I think, you know, it might be good to just maybe come to one of our research meetings and just see the kinds of things that we do, and then it might just be finding the right people. And I think, you know, often this is why these kinds of research meetings and these kinds of meetings that we're having right now are so important, to just find those links, because, you know, within South Australia, we're a pretty small research community, and we do need to collaborate and work together. There's a lot of things we can do. I mean, we've in our research meeting, we've got people doing artificial intelligence of COPD who've got access to all the CAT scans and X-rays of patients, as well as all their lung function. So, you know, there's a lot of stuff that we already have, but then we could easily add on a blood sample or some sort of a test that would really enhance that even further. So there's a lot of things we could do.
Look, I would add to that. I know it's we're close to time and probably just a little over. Yes, Sutapa, as you alluded to, one of our collaborations are with blood biomarkers circulating DNA in lung cancer. Look, I'd really like to thank Bob and Sutapa and Kara for organizing it. I think Bob and Sutapa have transformed the department in the South into an active clinical research entity. It is an exciting time for Southern Adelaide, and you'd all agree in South Australia, as we see the space emerge.